All right, get ready, because our deep dive today takes us to a place you might not expect,
Where are we headed?
the squash court. But the story of this sport, it doesn't start in some fancy athletic club.
Oh, really? Where then?
It actually starts in a London prison.
A prison? That's not what I was picturing, no.
Yeah, not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think of sleek athleticism, huh?
Not at all. How did squash end up with such an unexpected origin?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Squash has these humble beginnings, you see. It evolved from another racket sport, rackets.
Rackets, okay.
And get this, it was the prisoners in Fleet Prison who were playing this game, just to pass the time.
Wow, talk about making the most of a bad situation.
Right, so we've got these prisoners stuck in their cells playing rackets. How does that even work? I mean, was it like a mini version of the game?
You can picture these inmates hitting a ball against the walls of their cells,
Ah, I see.
trying to stay active and maybe, for a moment escaping their reality.
It's like this need to play, to compete. It can transcend even the most difficult circumstances.
Exactly. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But how did this prison game become the squash we know? Was it a gradual thing, or was there like a defining moment?
Well, the story goes, around 1830, some students at Harrow School, they got a little impatient.
Patient for what?
They were waiting their turn on the rackets court. And while they were waiting, they started messing around with a smaller, softer ball.
Oh, so they created their own version of the game while they waited.
Pretty much, yeah. And they were playing outside, not on an official court.
So squash was born out of, what, teenage boredom?
You could say that. It's a pretty cool origin story, if you ask me.
Definitely. And it fits with that theme of improvisation we saw with the prisoners. But how did the game get its name? Squash. It's kind of a funny word when you think about it.
I know, right? But there's a story behind that, too. It said that during one of those makeshift games, a punctured rubber ball was being used. And when it hit the wall, it made this distinct, squashing sound.
Ah, so the sound of the ball gave birth to the name of the sport. That's amazing.
It is, isn't it? Just a simple accident leading to a global sport.
A happy accident. So from prison cells to a prestigious school, squash had these unconventional beginnings.
It definitely did.
But when did it actually become more organized? Like, when did those first official squash courts appear?
Well, at Harrow in 1864, they built the first 4 official courts specifically for squash.
That's a pretty big step.
It was. You could say that's when squash started to really take shape as a sport.
Okay, so we have these dedicated courts, but did people outside of Harrow School start playing?
Definitely. It started spreading first through England, and then it went global.
It's like squash broke free from its little niche and just took off.
Yeah, it did.
When did organizations start to form, like to govern this rapidly growing sport?
Right. Well, first there was the Squash Rackets Association of England,
Mm.
and then the United States Squash Rackets Association was formed too.
So we're talking late 19th, early 20th century.
Yeah, exactly. Squash was getting pretty popular on an international level by then.
Okay, so then what? When did things get even more official, like on a global level?
Well, in 1968, the International Squash Rackets Federation was created.
The ISRF for short.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They were tasked with overseeing squash worldwide.
It's amazing how a game that started in a prison cell became this organized global sport.
It is a pretty remarkable journey.
And the ISRF, that's the precursor to the World Squash Federation we know today, right?
That's right. In 1992, the ISRF merged with the Women's International Squash Federation.
Ah, creating the WSF.
Yep. And today, the WSF, they have over 135 national squash associations. They're even recognized by the International Olympic Committee.
From prison pastime to almost an Olympic sport. That's incredible.
It is a long way from those makeshift games, right?
Speaking of squash hotspots, you mentioned that Hong Kong's a bit of a hub for the sport.
Definitely. Hong Kong is squash crazy.
But how did squash even get to Hong Kong?
That's a fun story. It was actually introduced by the British Army in the early 20th century.
Interesting.
And get this, the very first squash court in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It was built on the same spot where the Hong Kong Squash Center stands today.
Wow, what a coincidence. So they knew squash would become a big deal there.
Talk about foreshadowing.
Definitely. So squash arrives in Hong Kong thanks to the British Army. But when did it really take off as an organized sport there?
Things really started rolling in 1961. That's when the Hong Kong Squash Rackets Association was formed.
The HKSRA.
Yeah, that's the one. And from there, squash just exploded in popularity.
It's like Hong Kong embraced squash with open arms.
It did.
What was it about squash that resonated so well with Hong Kong?
Well, squash is this great mix of athleticism, strategy, and you don't need a lot of space to play. Perfect for a dense urban environment like Hong Kong.
It's like the sport found its perfect urban jungle.
Right. And later, the HKSRA, they even changed their name.
Oh, to what?
Just Hong Kong squash in 1996, putting the focus on the sport itself.
It's a statement, isn't it? Like, this is who we are, this is what we love.
Exactly.
So we've got this amazing backstory. But before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the game, let's set the scene for our listener.
Okay.
Picture yourself stepping onto a squash court for the first time.
All right, I'm there.
What do you see?
Well, first thing, it's enclosed. 4 walls, a floor. It's rectangular.
Okay.
The front wall, that's where most of the action is, but all 4 walls are part of the game.
So it's a very dynamic space.
Yeah, definitely. And there are lines marking different areas.
Lines on the walls, lines on the floor.
Both, yep. And those lines, they're not just for decoration, they're key for understanding the rules of the game.
It's like a giant game board where every marking means something.
Exactly.
Okay, can we break down some of those key lines and areas?
Of course. So you have the out-of-court line, which runs along the top edge of each wall, marking that upper boundary. And then there's the service line, halfway up the front wall. Below that, you'll find the half-court line, which splits the court in 2.
Okay.
Closer to the front wall, we have the short line, defining those service boxes. And right in the center of the court, where the short line and half-court line meet, you have it.
What's that?
The tee.
The tee, the heart of the squash court.
Exactly.
But why is this tee so important?
Well, strategically, the tee is the best position to return to after each shot. From there, you can cover the court well, react to your opponent's moves. It's all about positioning and control.
So the tee, it's like your home base, the place where you want to be to dominate the game.
You could say that, yeah. It's a very strategic spot on the court.
This is already getting my strategic mind going.
Yeah.
But before we get to the actual gameplay, what about the gear? What do you need to play squash?
The essentials are a racket, obviously, a ball, and eye protection is crucial, especially in Hong Kong, where it's mandatory for juniors.
Safety first. Makes sense, with fast-moving ball and all. Now, those rackets, they look different from, say, a tennis racket. What about grip sizes?
Grip size is important. You've got short, mid, and long. And they impact your game, how you play.
Fill me in.
Well, with a shorter grip, you have more control over the racket head, so greater precision. A longer grip, more leverage for power, but maybe less control.
It's like choosing your weapon, balancing control with power.
Exactly. And attire matters, too.
Oh, really? I always wondered why squash players wear those light-colored shirts. It's not just a fashion statement.
Nope. It's actually so your opponent can clearly see the ball against the white walls.
Fair play.
Yep. And non-marking shoes, of course, you don't want to be scuffing up the court.
Makes sense. Any other surprising must-haves?
Don't underestimate good socks. Seriously, squash involves a lot of quick movement, lots of changes in direction, so supportive socks, they're crucial to prevent blisters and keep your feet happy.
From grip size to socks, every detail matters in squash.
It does. It's a game of finesse, strategy, and, yeah, even the right gear.
All right, ready to hear about the game itself? Take us through the basics of a singles match. Where does it all begin?
Like most racket sports, we start with a serve.
Okay.
You spin the racket to decide who serves first, and then the winner gets to choose which service box to serve from. There's one on each side.
Okay, 2 service boxes, got it.
And the server has to have 1 foot inside the box when they serve, and the ball has to hit the front wall directly between the service line and the out-of-court line, landing in the back half of the opposite court.
Wow, there are a lot of rules just for the serve.
It's all about being precise and setting up the rally.
It sounds like a game of angles and accuracy right from the start. So what happens after the serve?
Then the rally begins. Players hit the ball back and forth until the rally ends.
Okay, but how does a rally end?
There are a few ways. A player could miss the ball or hit it incorrectly, like into the tin.
The tin.
Yeah, that metal strip at the bottom of the front wall. So hitting the tin is a knot up.
Ah, I see.
The ball could bounce twice on the floor before being hit, another knot up, or, it could hit the floor before reaching the front wall.
Okay, so there are a few ways to get a knot up. What about if the ball hits those lines we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, if it hits the tin or the board line, it's called down. And if it lands outside the out-of-court line, that's out.
Got it. Knot up, down, and out. I'm starting to learn the squash lingo. But with so many ways for a rally to end, I bet there are a lot of judgment calls, especially with those not-up situations.
There are definitely some subtleties to the rules for sure, especially when it comes to not up calls.
It sounds like there's room for debate.
Oh, there definitely can be. But for now, let's stick with the basic flow of the game.
All right, sounds good. So we've got these rallies, and each rally is a chance for either player to score a point.
Exactly. It's PAR11 scoring pointer rally to 11.
PR11. Gotta love a good acronym.
Right. So, first player to 11 points wins the game. But if the score gets to 10 all, then things change a bit.
How so?
At 10 all, the game keeps going until one player gets 2 points ahead. It adds a little extra pressure.
Sudden death. I could see how that would make those close games even more intense.
Definitely does.
And what about serving? Do players switch sides after every point, like in volleyball?
Not quite. The server keeps serving until they lose a rally. Then the other player gets to serve, and they choose their service box.
Okay, so the serve only switches when the server loses a rally.
Exactly. But remember that 10-all situation we talked about? In that tiebreaker, the serve changes after every rally.
So it keeps things balanced even when the pressure's on.
Exactly. Adds another layer of strategy.
So even the scoring system has its own tactical twists and turns.
Yeah.
Squash is really shaping up to be a thinking person's game. Now, what about those shots? What are the basic ones every squash player needs to master?
The drive is your go-to for hitting the ball deep, into those back corners.
Power and accuracy.
You got it. Then there's the drop shot. That's where you lift the ball just over the tin, trying to make it die in that front corner.
Deceptive.
It is. And of course you have the lob.
The lob, okay.
That's that high arcing shot, ideally landing in the back corner, making your opponent run like crazy to get to it.
So we've got power with the drive, deception with the drop shot, and what would you say? Height and depth with the lob.
Perfect descriptions. It's a beautiful blend of power and finesse, for sure.
It sounds like it. And what about those fast exchanges I've seen at the front of the court?
That's the volley, where you hit the ball before it bounces.
Like in tennis.
Exactly. It can catch your opponent off guard and often ends the rally quickly. But it's risky, too. Needs quick reflexes.
High risk, high reward. Now, I have a feeling those aren't the only shots in a seasoned player's arsenal. What are some of the more advanced moves?
Well, there are a couple of shots that can really change the game, show off a player's strategic thinking. The boast and the nick. The boast involves hitting the ball off a sidewall first.
Oh, before it hits the front wall?
Yep. Creates an unexpected angle.
So you're using the walls to your advantage, making things tricky for your opponent.
Exactly. And the nick, that's when you hit the ball right into the junction of two walls, or the wall on the floor.
So the ball just dies there.
Pretty much. Almost impossible to return. It's all about precision.
I can see how mastering these shots takes squash to a whole new level. It's not just about hitting the ball. It's about knowing when to hit it. Right.
Exactly. Choosing the right shot at the right time, that's what separates good players from great players.
It's like a mental game of chess, but played at high speed.
That's a great way to put it. You need to think ahead, anticipate your opponent, and pick the shot that gives you the upper hand.
So it's this amazing blend of physical and mental agility. It's no wonder people find squash so captivating.
It's a fascinating sport, that's for sure.
We're back and ready to dive even deeper into the world of squash. Now, we've been talking about all these impressive shots, but what about the etiquette of the game?
Oh yeah, etiquette's important, especially in squash.
Squash seems pretty intense. Players are so close to each other. How do they make sure things stay fair?
That's where interference comes in. It's all about giving your opponent space.
Right. It's not about trying to knock them over to get the point.
Exactly. You need to let them move freely and have a clear view of the ball.
So what happens if a player thinks their opponent got in the way?
That's when they can call let, please.
Let please. Okay.
Yeah, they're asking the referee to make a judgment call.
So the referee has to step in and decide if there was interference.
Right. And the referee, they have a few things to think about.
Okay, break it down for us. What are those key questions the referee considers?
First, they need to determine if interference actually happened.
Okay, that makes sense.
If not, it's a no-let, and play just keeps going.
Makes sense. But what if there was interference? What then?
Then the referee asks, could the player who was blocked have gotten to the ball and made a good return?
So it's not just about contact. It's about whether that contact actually prevented a good shot.
Exactly. If the referee thinks the player could have reached the ball anyway.
Another no-let.
You got it. But if the referee believes the player was blocked from making a good return, Then they look at the other player.
The one who might have caused the interference.
Right. And the question becomes, did that player try their best to get out of the way?
Did they make every effort? That seems like a tough call for the ref.
It is. They have to look at the players' positions, how fast they were moving, where the ball was going.
A lot to consider in a split second.
For sure. And if they think that player didn't make a reasonable effort to avoid blocking,
Then what? What happens to the player who was blocked?
they get a stroke.
Stroke. So it's like a penalty for not giving your opponent space.
Exactly. It makes sure players are always thinking about their opponent's space, that they're not trying to win by cheating, you know? But if the ref thinks that player did everything they could to get out of the way, then there's one more question.
Let me guess it has to do with whether the blocked player was about to score a winning shot.
You got it. If they were about to win the point.
A stroke is awarded, right?
Right. Because they were blocked from getting that point. But if the referee thinks the player could have made a decent shot, but not necessarily a winning shot, then it's a yes let.
Yes, let, meaning they replay the rally.
Exactly. Gives the player who is blocked another chance.
It's like a do-over, making things fair again.
That's the idea.
This whole interference system, it's super intricate, but it makes sense. It's about making sure the game is decided by skill, not sneaky tactics.
Definitely. And to help make these calls, lots of pro matches use video review now.
Oh yeah, like in other sports?
Yep. Players can challenge the referee's call. And with the replay, it's easier to see if there was interference, and how it impacted the rally.
It brings technology into the equation to help with those close calls.
Exactly. Make sure things are as fair as possible.
Speaking of fairness, I know there's a rule about not hitting your opponent with the ball. Could you talk about that a bit more? I mean, it seems obvious, but I imagine with the speed of the game, things happen.
Yeah, for sure. Things can get pretty intense out there.
So is it always a foul if you hit your opponent? Or are there exceptions?
Well, it depends. If it's clear the hit was just an accident and the shot would have been good otherwise, play might just continue.
Okay.
But if a player hits their opponent on purpose, or if it's a reckless shot, that's a conduct violation. Could even mean a penalty.
So it's really about discouraging dangerous or unsportsmanlike behavior.
Exactly. Safety and respect are paramount.
Now, something that might seem a bit strange to those who haven't played squash,
Yeah.
warming up the ball. It's actually part of the rules, right? Why is it so important?
It is in the rules.
Yeah.
And it's important because a squash ball, it's small, it's rubber, so temperature affects it a lot.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, a cold ball is harder, doesn't bounce as well, makes for a slow game.
So warming up the ball makes it livelier.
Exactly, and there's a specific way to do it. At the start of a match, each player has 4 minutes to hit the ball, get it warmed up, get themselves ready.
4 minutes, okay.
For the first 2, they take turns hitting the ball to each other, and then they switch sides of the court to make sure the whole ball is warmed up evenly.
Wow, so even the warm-up has rules.
It does. Gotta do it right.
Speaking of doing things right, I've always wondered about the different colors and numbers you see on squash balls. What's that all about?
Those markings tell you how fast the ball is, how much it bounces.
Ah, so it's like a code for the ball's characteristics.
Exactly. The double yellow dot, that's the most common, the one beginners usually use. It has a medium speed and bounce.
So that's the one I should start with when I eventually get on the court.
Probably a good idea. Then you have the single yellow dot, that's faster.
Okay.
And then the red dot, even faster. And the fastest one, the blue dot.
The blue dot for the pros.
You got it.
So choosing the right ball, that impacts the game too.
It does, definitely. A faster ball, it's more challenging, requires more skill. A slower ball, you get longer rallies, you can focus more on strategy.
It's amazing how something as simple as the ball can change the whole dynamic of the game. Now, what about watching squash? Is it as exciting to watch as it is to play?
Watching a live match is awesome. It's intense.
I bet, with those 4 walls and the close quarters.
You're right there. You can feel the energy.
And with those glass walls, you can see everything.
Exactly. You get a 360-degree view. You see every shot, every lunge, every decision. And those rallies can be so long, so unpredictable.
Keep you on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen next.
Definitely.
Now, all this talk about competition and skill, it's great. But can anyone play squash, even if they're not aiming to go pro?
Absolutely. Squash is for everyone, no matter your age or skill level.
It's that accessible.
It is. It's a great workout mentally and physically, and it's fun.
So you don't need to be a world-class athlete to step on a court and have a good time.
Not at all. Most squash clubs, they have lessons for beginners and social leagues where you can play against people at your level.
Ah, so it's a social thing too.
Oh, yeah. It's about making friends, challenging yourself, and having a blast.
It's a community, a shared passion for the game. I can see why people get hooked.
It's a really special sport.
We've covered so much ground today, from the history to the rules, the equipment, even the spectator experience. But there's still one more piece of the puzzle.
What's that?
The future of squash.
Yeah.
Where is this dynamic sport headed?
The future of squash. It's full of potential, full of excitement.
That's what I like to hear.
Well, one of the big ones is getting more attention from sponsors and media.
Yeah. Squash often gets overshadowed by, like, tennis or badminton, right?
It does, which makes it harder to get funding, harder to get those big broadcast deals.
It's like squash is this hidden gem that needs to be shown to the world.
That's a good way to put it.
So how do we get squash out of the shadows? How do we show people how exciting and athletic it is?
I think one way is to keep innovating, pushing the boundaries of the game. Some tournaments are already doing that, experimenting with shorter match formats, making things more interactive for the crowd.
Oh, yeah, like what?
Well, like adding music, special lighting effects, maybe even having commentators who are a bit more lively.
So making it more of a spectacle.
Exactly. And using technology to, enhance the viewing experience.
So it's about bringing elements of that modern entertainment world into squash.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not just about changing the format of the game, right? It's also about showing the human side of squash, the stories of the players.
Right. Squash players, they're incredibly dedicated athletes. They have amazing stories of perseverance, passion, the pursuit of excellence. Sharing those stories can help fans connect with the sport on a deeper level.
It's about making squash more relatable, showing that there's more to it than just hitting a ball.
Exactly. It's about the people, the personalities, the journeys they've been on to get to where they are.
And that can inspire others, too.
It can. It can show people that squash is about more than just winning or losing. It's about pushing yourself, overcoming challenges, and striving for your best.
It's a metaphor for life.
It is.
Well, this deep dive into squash has been an eye-opener. I've learned so much. From the prison origins to the high-tech courts of the future, it's been a fascinating journey.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. And who knows, maybe I'll even try squash myself someday.
You should. It's a fantastic sport.
And to everyone listening, we hope you've discovered something new about this incredible sport. Squash is full of surprises, and it's a sport that anyone can enjoy regardless of age or skill level. So go out there, explore, and maybe we'll see you on the squash court someday.